to get started, I'd like to find out what problems you guys have with court cards, or um, how you normally work with them. Either how you normally work with them, or what kind of problems or questions you have, so I can try to kind of address that.
I think I don't always know when it's appropriate to have them represent other people in your life. Like I feel like a lot of people will say if a court card shows up, it's probably somebody that you're interacting with. But sometimes it doesn't always seem to be the case. Like it's more of it could be like an inner thing that you're dealing with, a side of yourself. Like I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a good one, is when is it other people and when is it part of yourself? And that's one of the main things that I do want to talk about.
I took your court card class, and
right.
I don't know. I still like having the page as the younger child, the younger person, and the knight as like the younger or the adolescent or young adult kind of person, and then the queen as the more of the matriarch, and the king as more of the father type figure, or the older male figure. That has worked pretty well for me.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I use those a lot and find them really useful too. Anybody else have any either questions or just ways that they like to use the court cards that they think is useful to them?
I tend to use the king and queen as more of the masculine and feminine qualities in someone. Where my challenge tends to be is I tend to be very literal. So like using the knight as somebody that's kind of the enforcer of whatever that suit is, and the page as, somebody that's like a messenger, because I kind of like roll with history and how those kind of work out. So,
okay.
And again, I think it's my, instead of, I don't want to say being intuitive, because it's still kind of coming out that way, but I still have that literal brain kind of rolling as I look at them, and I know that can be a good sign, but it can also be kind of detrimental too. So
no, that I don't ever think that there's anything wrong with working literally with the cards. In fact, I think sometimes, to be honest, you can get much more accuracy in the cards by having simpler, more literal meanings for them, because it gives you a starting point, and the reading can grow from that. But to have like I always use the card to mean this, then it'll probably come up to mean that when you need it to, and that gives you, and it's not like, well, it could mean this or that or the other thing. It's just like, boom, this is what it means every time when I use it. The knight's always the enforcer. If a knight comes up, boom, something's being enforced. and so that to me is really, I think, is really useful. So yeah, don't ever always strive towards having those literal meanings as a ground point. But I see what you're saying, that it's also useful to be able to expand out of that. So yeah, keeping the balance is good. Okay, so well, the main three ways that I have probably come across people using court cards, of course, is as an aspect of yourself, as general energies in the reading, and as, of course, as other people. I guess one of the main things with court cards, in terms of it referencing you, is the idea of a significator card. And why this is important is that having your own significator card helps you understand when the cards are referencing you generally versus when they are recommending a certain quality within yourself. And let me kind of explain that in a little bit more detail. but first of all, I'll describe what a significator card is. And a significator card is a card that you use to represent yourself. And it's fairly traditional to use something that represents you based on visual appearance or visual correspondence. You look like the card. Although there are, my favorite way of doing it is based on the astrology, and that's probably the other of the most common ways of doing it. I'm an Aries, and my teacher taught me that the Queen of Wands is Aries, and so I'm Queen of Wands. That made sense to me. She's always shown with a black cat. I tend to have cats. They often are black. They're just things like that. Queen of Wands is associated with somebody with red hair, and so it just, there was a lot of reasons why Queen of Wands worked really well for me, above and beyond the fact that it was also my astrological sign. And so the first way of picking a significator is based on how you look. Do you look like the person in the card? But the second way, and I think this is the most common, is based on the element of the court card and the gender of the characters. And so, and I don't necessarily use this, but a lot of people do. And so in that sense, if you are a female, you would use a queen, and you would use the element or the suit that matches your astrological sign. So again, as a woman, I would use the queen, and for fire, I would use wands. And so that way also gets me Queen of Wands. If you're a Cancer and you're a man, you would use water for Cancer, which is the cup suit, and then you would use the king. Now the King of Cups is actually Scorpio, and the Queen of Cups is Cancer, using the astrological correspondences. And I think that's probably a pretty good way to do it. A lot of people do like to identify with a card that's the same, that expresses the same gender they express, and that to me is fine. I have it in terms of clients. I have it come up both ways. I did a reading recently for a woman who had some ongoing complications with a particular man, and he came up in the spread. I did a big spread for them. I did the opening of the key, and he came up as the King of Wands, the Emperor, the Knight of Wands, and I think he came up as those three. And so the King of, and that's all three of the astrological correspondences. The King of Wands is Leo, the Emperor is Aries, and the Knight of Wands is Sagittarius. I said, well, I know he's a fire sign. She's laughing. She's like, he is. Do you want me to tell you? I said, no, not yet. And we kind of went through the whole reading, and finally I said, I don't know, he keeps coming up most as the King of Wands and as the Emperor. Is he a Aries or is he a Leo? And she said he was Leo, and so that's that King of Wands. So I guess okay. I'm trying to do these Saturday ones without an outline. You know that really does not work very well for me. I'm really working hard at trying to be able to do this a little bit more extempore. So to let you know how the astrological correspondences work, the basic way of doing it, and like I said, it can get more complicated, but the basic way of doing it is that the kings are the fixed signs, and the queens are the cardinal signs, and the knights are the mutable signs. So your queens are your kings as fixed. You'll have your King of Wands being fixed fire, so that's Leo. King of Cups is fixed water, which is Scorpio. King of Swords is fixed air, which is Aquarius, and the King of Coins is a fixed earth, which is Taurus. Your queens are Cardinal, Queen of Wands, Aries, Queen of Cups, Cancer, Queen of Swords, Libra, and Queen of Coins is Capricorn. And then your knights are mutable. And so the Knight of Wands is Sagittarius, Knight of Cups is Pisces, Knight of Swords is Gemini, and the Knight of Coins is Virgo. And so, Jennifer, when you're using your Thoth deck, that's still true even though those knights are the highest rank, and they're still the mutable sign. Let me stop for a second and ask, do you guys use a significator card? And if so, how do you choose it?
I was gonna say, I usually just use my that's linked to my astrological sign, the Hermit.
So you use a major arcana.
Yeah, that I learned in your class, and so I kind of roll with that. But I know that there's some other common ones that come up, but nothing specific. So I tend to lean more towards that one.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
This is the first time I heard about it, so.
It's the first time you heard about it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, so some of the reasons, let me give you more information. I didn't realize this would be new. In fact, I really thought that I was telling you guys something that was so well known that you would be bored. So I'm glad it's new and of interest to some of you. And so, again, having that card, choosing a card to represent yourself, and you can use a major arcana. A lot of people do. In fact, again, in terms of that general advice, a lot of people will pick the magician if they're male or the high priestess if they're female, sometimes the empress. But again, I would still go with my astrological sign. Jennifer uses the Hermit, which is Virgo. I would use in that case the Emperor, which is Aries, and so on. But having that card to represent you, really, there's a lot of ways that it can be useful. One, you can, when that card comes up, you know it's talking about you. You know that this is a spread about you. This is showing something specifically about you. And that kind of answers part of that first question is, when is this me and when is this somebody else? You'll also another way of picking a significator is just a card that comes up for you a lot. I tend to get the Page of Wands for myself quite a bit. And I thought I'd outgrow it, but I haven't. So not quite sure about that, but I kind of like the Page of Wands. So I finally am fine with it again. I liked it for a long time. Then I was disappointed that I was still coming up as a page, and now I'm like, whatever, that's fine. And so in some ways, just like that card that just keeps coming up all the time, every time you do a reading, that can be kind of a significator card. Sometimes it's just a card that is your favorite card. It's just like, I love this card. I love seeing it come up. Okay, good. That card represents you. Or sometimes it's more of an idealistic thing. It's like, I wish I was more like this, and I'd like to cultivate those qualities. I wish I was more like the Empress. So I want to use the Empress to help remind me to have those qualities. And so those are some different ways that you can choose a card to be your significator. Sticking to court cards, and like I said, the way that we do it primarily in spreads like the opening of the key is we use the court cards, and we base it on the astrological sign. One of the things that's really useful to me when I'm doing readings for myself in terms of knowing whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, is that I tend to get the Queen of Wands a lot and the Page of Wands. I also tend to get the Queen of Cups a lot. I've got Cancer Moon and Cancer Rising, so that Queen of Cups as Cancer works a lot for me. I will sometimes get the Queen of Coins just because a lot less frequently, but she does tend to represent that kind of security around money and things that, especially when I'm asking questions about business, I'm much more likely to have her come up and just kind of let me know if I'm on track with my business. I pretty much never get the Queen of Swords. It's really, really rare for me to get the Queen of Swords. One of the benefits of that is that if the Queen of Swords comes up, then I know that it's somebody else. Back in the old days when I was single, you know, if I was doing a reading about somebody I had a crush on or somebody I was interested in or curious about, that was really useful. If it came up Queen of Swords in the answers, then I'd like, okay, he's already got somebody, he's seeing somebody, you know, there's somebody else in the picture, and I'm like, cool, that's good to know. And so that was kind of useful for me when I was doing readings for myself. So so that's just one. So understanding the use of the significator, finding your significator and seeing if it's a card that really kind of matches you or feels right for you, and finding the one that does, it really helps, I think, put the court cards in perspective, because then you've got you versus the other things. So now that we kind of have our sense of when is the card you, and I guess the one other thing that I'll say about that is that also it tends to be you when it's, even if you have more than one card. Like I said, I'll tend to get the Page of Wands, the Queen of Wands, the Queen of Cups. I get those a lot, sometimes the Queen of Coins. That's still only 4 out of the 16. So yeah, it's still now 25% of the deck represents me, or 25% of the court cards represent me. I am an Aries, of course. But more importantly, I kind of now know these cards are coming into play because they're more often about me. The other cards are coming into play because they're more often about somebody else. So let's go on to the idea of the cards as energies, because I think that kind of grows out of what we're talking about here. The court cards definitely do represent energies. And again, I use the astrological correspondences, and so my understanding of those energies, once I mapped the all the court cards, well, the 12, not counting the pages, the 12, the Knights, the Queens, and the Kings. Once I mapped those onto the 12 signs and started working with that regularly, the court cards really came into a lot more focus for me. So if you already know a little bit of astrology, and astrology is super, super popular right now, and so a lot of people do know the 12 signs. Even like 20 years ago, that was less common for people to know all 12 signs. And I think nowadays it's a lot more common for people to know that. So if you do know that, then that's useful, and you can map those cards onto the signs, and then you have a full-fledged character for each card based on those astrological correspondences. But even if you don't, we still have a sense of energies, whether it because of the suit. And so the wands are fire, so they're exciting, they're passionate, they jump right into things. They're exciting, they like to explore, that kind of energy for the wands. The cups are water, and so they're caring, nurturing, healing, they're more imaginative, they're more quieter, more meditative. And so again, we have a bunch of energies that are associated with that suit. The swords are the element air, so they're more philosophical, more intellectual, better communicators, more social, more talkative, and expressive verbally or in writing. And the coins are the element earth, or the pentacles are the element earth. And so those are, the element earth is considered to be stable and secure and committed, and kind of solid and reliable and dependable. And so again, we've got a slew of energies around those each suit, and the court cards, as they come up in the readings, can bring that element up with them. I think I'll kind of leave it at that for those. One of the things in terms of, there's kind of a couple examples I think I can give you. One is the, when I'm doing relationship readings for people, a lot of times, sometimes, and I'll use a typical reading with me usually consists of me laying out 3 or 4 different spreads during the course of the reading. I might be doing that really big spread, the opening of the key, which takes a good hour plus, hour and a half to lay that all out, in which case it's one spread, but it still has a number of different components, so the cards work together throughout the course of the reading. They work together in different ways. But even just a half-hour spread, I'll probably lay out that 7-card layout that I taught you guys last time, and then I'll do maybe some other shorter spreads that I have, or even a bunch of 2-card draws. And I talked about that a lot in our last meeting, which is up on YouTube if you want to go check that out. And if somebody's asking about relationship, I'm going to try to figure out what their significator card is, and usually it'll come up for me in the first spread that we throw. But even if their card doesn't come up, and we would determine that through either I've thrown multiples, that's what I was getting at. If I've thrown multiple spreads, the very first spread is most likely to bring up their significator card, and subsequent spreads are more likely to discuss the energy that they're bringing to a relationship, or the energy that's being recommended to them. And so that, I guess that's the rule. If I want to try to like separate out some rules here, the first spread of multiple spreads is most likely to bring up the person's significator card. Subsequent spreads for follow-up questions are more likely to bring out the energies around it. But to then kind of get into it, when I'm doing a relationship spread, as an example, if somebody comes up as wands, wands are fire. Wands are extremely independent. And so if they come up as wands, they're not always looking for a relationship, or if they are looking for a relationship, they really need to be able to maintain their independence while they're in a relationship. And that modifies, what they're available for, and how that relationship has to look. So wands coming up will indicate that even if somebody is, a Queen of Cups, normally, like very, very loving, caring, that's very relationship oriented. If she shows up as Queen of Wands, she needs her independence right now. She needs to be on her own. She needs to do her own thing right now. Queen of the Swords in general, and this will get modified slightly as I explain a couple different things. Swords in general Also, wands and swords are both a little bit more independent. Swords in general tend to be a little more intellectual and a little less emotional. And so a swords card in general is going to indicate somebody that wants a relationship for intellectual reasons. I need a partner. I need somebody to help me with this. I need somebody that I can talk to. Those are going to be swords reasons for getting into a relationship. However, in particular, the Queen of Swords, because she's Libra, and Libra represents partnership in terms of astrology. The Queen of Swords in particular is about partnership. We still, the Libra is a scales, and so it's about the balance. And so the Queen of Swords needs equality in partnership. She needs to have that equal balance in her relationships. So if I get a Queen of Wands type who's naturally very independent, but then she shows up in her reading as the Queen of Swords, that's the energy that is coming up in the spread. The energy is that this independent woman is ready for partnership, because she's ready to have those balanced scales, that two people interacting together in a relationship. Likewise, if I get if I get any kind of wands cards, this in terms of, again, this is and size. Court cards they come out the most in relationship readings, plus just a lot of people have relationship questions. So these are most of my examples. I've got some examples that aren't relationships, so we can look forward to that. In terms of relationships, the knights are growing and changing. They're developing and striving onward. If I'm reading for somebody that is in high school or college or kind of in their 20s even, having that knight come up is really appropriate for them. But if they're older than that, or if they're whatever age they are, they're ready to settle down, we don't want to see those knights. The knights are not ready to settle down. They still need to grow and expand. Pages in relationship readings either represent that the person already has children, or it'll represent that the person is immature, childlike. Sometimes it can represent the relationship itself if the relationship is new, because pages are new and inexperienced at something. And so the pages can represent the newness of the relationship. And this, even though I keep using relationship as the example, this is true of work or anything else. Pages will represent a new job that is just coming into play, or a new business that just got started and that still has a lot to learn about how to make it work. The knights are they're pushing forward really fast. They're on their horses. They're ready to move. They're going sometimes in all different directions. They haven't quite found their pace yet, but they're driving forward. That's a really good growth card in terms of business. That's really good for growth. It's time to grow. It's time to expand. It's time to push your boundaries, expand your borders, and so on. The queens tend to be, well, I guess I'll go to the kings. The kings are, I guess I read both queens and kings kind of the same. Especially for relationships, the queens and kings are both really stable and solid, and they're both really ready, and they're mature is a word that comes up frequently in the tarot books. They're both mature and they're ready for something. They're ready to have that relationship. So if I get, if I get a woman that asks about a certain person and she comes up, let's say the Queen of Coins. Coins is the stability, the security, it's the commitment. That tells me she's ready for something that's really committed. If her partner comes up as the Knight of Wands, the knights are all growing and expanding. If he's the Knight of Coins, I might say he's growing towards her, but the Knight of Wands He likes to explore too much. He's galloping off in every direction, trying to find out what's new and what's over the horizon. So he's not a good fit for her because, one, he's a knight and she's a queen. Two, he's wands and not ready to settle down, and she's coins and is ready to settle down. So these are different examples of how the cards represent an energy that might not be his card, but it's the card that he's bringing, it's the energy that he's bringing to the relationship. One other example that I have for this is a woman that I did a reading for, a woman who owned a coffee shop. And she came up, and I've used this example in classes before, so people have taken classes with me might have heard it. But she came up as the Queen of Cups, the Queen of Coins, and the Queen of Wands in one 7-card spread. Actually, honestly, I think she came up, it was the Devil card, but the Devil is Capricorn, and Capricorn is the Queen of Coins. And I could see where it was going, so I read it strictly in that Capricorn sense. And so just to use court cards, it's easiest to think about it this way. So the Queen of Cups made a lot of sense. She ran a coffee house. She's handing people cups all day long, literally. She's filling cups. She's handing people cups. And so that's Queen of Cups. That's her and her natural, it's also her, it was her significator. She was very kind, generous. Let me make you some food. You know, they cooked. Some coffee shops don't. They had a kitchen and made sandwiches and burritos and things like that. So she really, that was kind of her baseline personality. It was her significator card, that she loved taking care of people, feeding them, doing that kind of thing. That's a very Queen of Cups thing. So Queen of Coins is Capricorn. Capricorn is considered to be very career oriented. It's also going to be, especially when the Devil's showing it, it's going to be about the bottom line. It's about, you know, this is the money that we need. This is how, you know, the baseline that we have to run this business. So the Queen of Cups came up first, and the Queen of Coins came up second. The final outcome card, and so obviously, like, her innate personality, her nurturing other people was part of that. The Queen of Coins as Capricorn was expressing her career orientation, and that this needed to be a career for her. It wasn't just a side thing that she did for fun. It really had to be a business. But in the final outcome position, we had the Queen of Wands. And so Queen of Wands is Aries, or Wands is fire, which is fire grows very quickly. And the Queen of Wands is Aries, which again is the springtime when there's a lot of growth. And I just generally get the Queen of Wands for entrepreneurship anyway. But that card, that energy that brought with the fire and the growth, was the idea of growing the business. So even though we had all three energies represented, the final recommendation was growing the business. So it turned out that what she explained to me afterward, what her real question, she just asked about the business, but really what was underlying it was she was wondering if she should hire somebody new. And so with the final card being growth, the answer was yes, you can grow now. Yes, bottom line is important, and and making sure that you can, you know, pay additional staff is going to be part of your Capricorn Queen of Coins type of energy. But the final outcome is growth. And so I was able to recommend to her really clearly that hiring somebody was in her best interest. Now, once she explained it all, it actually turned out that those three cards could have represented three different people. She was the Queen of Cups. Her husband was that Capricorn card, that he was the one that was trying to make sure that all the business things were taken care of, because they ran the business together. And the person she wanted to hire was, I think her husband's mother. It was somebody in the family, either her mother or her husband's mother. And that person had a Queen of Wands personality, which is a little bit of a take charge personality. And when it's a family business, you want to be really careful of that. You don't want somebody to just come in and take charge of everything. But the way the cards had laid out, we were already seeing that as the growth and bringing in somebody else. So part of my point here is that the energies can give you quite a lot of information, even when you're not reading it as aspects of yourself or aspects of the, you know, the querent or whatever. When you're reading it just as energies, it gives you a lot of information. Once she then tells me what the exact situation is, we could go back and reread those cards and understand them as the three main people involved: herself, her husband, and the mother-in-law. So so does that, I'll pause for now and ask, are there any questions? Does that bring to mind any examples that you've come across? Does that help you kind of get a sense of how the idea of cards as self, cards as energies, and moving in, we'll talk more about cards as other people, but moving into that idea, does that give you some more insight into that?
Hi, Joy. So, okay, so if somebody is a king, that's their significator, but then a page comes up, does that mean that maybe they need to be open to listening to other people's ideas? Or, you know, like, because kings are usually like, they have mastery of that element. So
Right.
if a page came up as the energy,
Well, yeah, I would say that's a really good question. And of course, obviously, the actual question being asked about in the context of the spread and stuff is really important. But to generalize, I would say if it's the King of Coins and the Page of Coins comes up, then I would be more likely to suggest that it was a mentee coming into play. If it's an aspect of himself, then probably his own inner child. Okay. Which probably hard to get a King of Coins to work with a Page of Coins, but definitely possible. Now, if it was another thing, though, if it was a different suit, if we had the King of Coins and the Page of Wands came up, then absolutely I would say, oh, here's something he's not very used to. He's very King of Coins, but the idea of the independence, of the excitement, of the exploration, he hasn't connected with that for a really long time, and this is something that would be useful for him to connect with, even if he's not very good at it. So does that kind of help?
Yeah. So if the significator is of one suit or element, and the same suit or element comes up, it's a different aspect of themselves.
Right.
If it's a different suit or element, then it would be a different energy. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions or comments or examples? And I see over in the chat somebody wrote the major arcana is the fifth element, and that is true. The major arcana is the element spirit, which doesn't play into the main astrological correspondences, but that's a really good point, and so I'm glad somebody mentioned it. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about when it represents yourself. We've kind of talked about when it can represent the energies of a situation. And so now we're going to get to the idea of other people. And I'll tell you now that I really do think that having cards represent yourself is kind of primary. It's kind of the first thing to do. I think ultimately I read court cards as people involved. And that's how I teach my students to do it. I really focus on, yeah, all of these other things are relevant, but it's most important to understand these as people. And the reason why is that none of us live in a vacuum. You know, we all have other people that we have to interact with on a regular basis. And by ignoring that and always seeing everything as an aspect of yourself or as just energies in the situation, I think can create a little bit of a glass house or something. Like I'm trying to think what the term is for those alchemical glass bulb things that you have, but whatever the word is for that, it's probably what I'm looking for. But it tends to kind of isolate you and separate you out from the mix. And maybe that's relevant, and maybe that's the reason you need to use the cards, is so that you can separate yourself out. And then once you understand yourself, put yourself back into the bigger picture of life. And so if you're using the cards solely for personal development, then I guess I can see that would be valuable. But I just personally really find it useful to be able to place other people in my life into the cards. I do an exercise in my court cards class where I suggest different scenarios and say, what are the types of people you would expect to show up? You know, if we're talking about a relationship scenario, you'd expect yourself to show up, the person you're interested or the people that you're interested in to show up. If they're seeing somebody that you know or don't know about, that person might show up. If they have children or you have children and that's important to the situation, that might show up. So just think about, what are the likely things to show up? Who are the likely people to show up in such a situation? If we're seeing too many queens and we've got a woman that wants to date a man and too many queens are coming up, that might be a clue. And likewise, when you're asking about work, what are the likely things to come up? You've got a boss, you've got coworkers, you know, maybe you have your own partner at home that's being affected by your work situation. You've got clients or customers. You know, those are the types of people that'll come up. And if we can learn to correlate the court cards to all those people that are coming up in any given situation, we can really get some very detailed information. And I guess that's my ultimate point, is that I like to have as much detail and accuracy as possible, and I don't like to go with a psychological reading. And if you're using the court cards as energies, you're going to get a psychological reading. And if you use the court cards as people, you will get a literal reading. And that to me is more useful. And I've done it both ways, and I've been reading since 1991, so there. That's my opinion on it. But that, to me, using the court cards as people brings out a lot more detail. Another example I have is I was doing a reading at the Athena Festival back in Denver, and I had a young woman, late teens, early 20s, I think. And she sat down and asked, I forget what she asked. I lay out the cards and it was all court cards. And I don't remember if I did my 7-card spread or if I did something else. I remember columns of court cards. So I almost wonder if I did some kind of different spread that I haven't been doing, that I don't do anymore. And I'm just looking at them all going, oh my gosh, what do I tell this young woman? And it occurred to me, it was all kings and queens. And finally I said, you know, you're letting everybody else tell you what to do. Because I was trying to even pick out her significator from the pile, and I couldn't identify it. And then I said, you're letting everybody else tell you what to do. Why is everybody in your business so much? and she told me that her parents had both been killed in some kind of accident, like a car crash or a plane crash or something like that. And everybody is trying to take care of her. She had foster parents, she had aunts and uncles, she had grandparents, she had teachers. Everybody's trying to take care of her, but she was too old to be taken care of. She didn't need it anymore. And so I picked up all the cards and put them aside, and I always bring several decks to most of the time. I bring several decks with me to fairs and things when I do that. So I reached and I had my Druid Craft deck, and the Druid Craft has most decks have the king, queen, or your typical Rider-Waite-Smith deck has a king, queen, knight, and page. The Druidcraft uses king, queen, princess, and prince and princess. And so I knew that she wouldn't come up as a page if I did that. I knew she'd be able to come up as a princess if I use that deck. So I pulled that deck out and laid out, we re-asked the question, rephrased it, I'm sure, and laid out the spread with that deck. She came up nice and clear right in the center as a princess. It was either Princess of Swords or Princess of Cups. They look really similar in that deck, so I can't quite remember which one it was. But she came up as a princess. It was totally clear, and no other court cards showed up. And then I was able to look at it from her perspective, and not all the clamoring voices in her head that were like, do it this way, do this, and clear all that stuff out and find out where she was in that spread. If I didn't see those court cards as other people, I'm not sure I would have found such a literal interpretation that literally everybody else was trying to tell her what to do. And so that was really useful. It's really useful to her, and it's really useful to us in terms of getting our reading going, that when she didn't show up in the first spread, I knew I needed to look deeper and find the lost self that she was, and we did that by switching to that other deck. I guess I'll pause for a minute and give people a chance to ask questions or give some more examples or whatever.
I have a question, Joy.
Yeah.
Had you just for whatever reason did not have a backup deck in that example you gave, how would you have done another reading for her?
Well, I would have modified the question and used the same deck, and modifying the question in and of itself should have taken care of it. But either she had already come up as a page, and so I'd seen that, or else I was just. And you can even set intentions. If I really didn't want her to see herself as a page, I could have just asked the cards to show us her more mature self in the cards, and probably would have gotten a queen that way. So there's a lot you can do just by setting those intentions. Or the other thing I could have done is laid out all the court cards for her to look at and said, which one do you like? Which looks like how you wish you were? Let her pick that, then either one, shuffle it into the deck, it'll probably come up, or two, if it doesn't, just leave it on the table and put cards around it. So there's definitely different ways you could deal with that situation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi again.
Hi.
I'm a Gemini, so
Okay.
I ask a lot of questions. I can't ever have enough information. So with court cards, just for you, do you ever use directionality? Like if they're facing each other, or like looking away from each other, or if they're like far apart in the spread, I'm sure people as readers, like, we kind of notice it, but I don't think it's used very often, or it's like a very minimal type of usage. So it's interesting, especially if you're doing a relationship spread, to see directions, right? So even if it's a king or a page or a queen, they're looking at each other. I feel like maybe there's a bit more of maybe a meeting of the minds in some way, or if they're anyway, so how do you work with that type of, I guess, element or energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think it is taught in, I don't know, I'm really limited in the books that I read about tarot. I tend to be I it's a fault that I have, but I tend to really stick to books that are on topics that I'm super interested in. So I tend to read just esoteric. So I can't necessarily, I was going to say it used to always be taught, but then I'm like, I don't know if it's being taught in the newer books because I haven't read them. And so, yeah, in esoteric books, it is always taught. Even your basic tarot books, I think, I imagine that people like Eden Gray and what's her name, Eileen Conley, do tend to mention things like that. And I do think that that's really useful. In the opening of the key, you can't turn the card. You can't turn the cards around because you do use that directionality to see which direction to count the cards, and so that's what I use it the most. That's how I use it the most. Plus, the deck that I use primarily, the court cards tend to face straight front. And so I lose a little bit of that element with my main deck, although I do think it's a useful element, and I would encourage deck creators or those of you that are designing decks, such as yourself, to incorporate
Rachel.
that
You're
back
welcome.
in.
I know.
Yeah, and so I do think it's useful, and you know, there's the idea of if the card is facing, I forget, it's like if it's facing, as you're looking at it, facing from the right towards the left, I think
It's like going towards the past. It's like,
yeah, but I think that's still considered a new energy coming in.
mm,
And if it's facing from the left towards the right, that's like backing up. It's like it's backing out. So it's like facing towards the past is actually a new energy coming in, and facing the other way is old energy that's coming out, because it doesn't intuitively match. I learned what you're talking about, which is when it's facing to the left, it's facing to the past, and when it's facing to the right, it's facing to the future. But the coming and going is the opposite. And so I use positions though in the spread. So my 7-card spread that we talked about last time, it's up on YouTube. The 2 on the left hand side are towards the past, and the 2 on the right side are towards the future. And so and that came up recently when I was doing a relationships spread of all things for somebody, and the King of Coins or King of Wands came up in it, but it was not the same gal as before, it's a different one, and it was on the left, and so I was able to say, chances are you already know this person, they're already in your circle, you might have already met them, something like that. It's on the left, so it's in the past, so there's already some kind of established relationship there. So that's kind of how I use that. Are there ways that you've used it that you found more useful than others in terms of the facing?
well, some of this comes more from like Lenormand, to be honest, you know, because, you know, the further away things are, you know, the more distant they become.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess, I don't know. Sometimes it's interesting. Like if you just do even tarot, like a simple 3-card spread, let's say you get 2 court cards on the end, and then there's a card in the middle. It's kind of like, oh, what's in between them? What's separating them? Who's looking which way? Or I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. It isn't actually something I work with very often, but I think as more of like an intermediate reader now, you start kind of going deeper into like, oh, how can I expand on just the simple, like, oh, this is a page, this is something new.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you can go, oh, well, which way is he facing? Like, what is he looking at? Or, you know, what are they doing? Or are they on top of something or below something? I don't know. That's all.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely would recommend working with all of those things. And those are all good examples that you came up with. Yeah, for sure. one of the other things that I want to talk about, since we've only got, I guess we really only have 10 minutes left. So, but I do want to take a couple minutes and talk about gender in the court cards. I would say that I definitely learned in the beginning that the queens were women and the kings were men, and I just kind of went with that to start with. Although pretty early on, within a year or two of learning to read, I had a boyfriend who had a friend who was gay, and my boyfriend would go to hang out with his friend, and so that guy's partner and I would just hang out in the way that people do. And that guy was such a Queen of Cups. He was Queen of Cups through and through. He looked like the Queen of Cups, and that always came up for him as a significator. So I figured out pretty early on that the cards are not necessarily matched in terms of gender. The Queen of Cups can come up for a man. And so I went through a period where I would ask people, rather than just pull cards based on gender, I would ask them, you know, do you feel more, you know, do you want me to use a male or a female card for you? And I was doing that, and every single man I got that night, it was at I remember specifically, it was at a particular event that I was doing, and every single man I got told me that he felt more like a woman and wanted to use a female card. And I started to be like, okay, not all of you can feel that feminine. And so and it wasn't necessarily, and it wasn't a looks thing either. Some of them, and it wasn't how I felt either. It wasn't like I feel a lot of feminine energy from you, or I feel a lot of masculine energy. And finally I was like, okay, I'm not gonna, it didn't feel useful for me at the time. Let me put it that way. I don't know how those people felt when they got asked that question. And this, we're talking in the early 90s that I did this. I don't know how those people, if they felt really honored or respected, or if it was the first time they'd ever heard such a question, or what. So now the attitudes around gender are really different now than they were then. And it probably would be much more, it's much more politically correct now to do something like that and to say, what kind of card do you want, you know? And you can say that of anybody. And like I said, I now use the astrological correspondences, so it's just really easy to you know, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, or anything else in terms of how they're dressed or anything like that. I just pull their astrological sign, and you know, and the gender doesn't matter. And I think that's really important, to be aware of how gender works in your deck of cards, and how you work with gender. I really think it's, for a long time, I taught my students there is no gender in the cards. But as soon as I did that, my cards started really coming up gendered. So I'm like, okay, there is some gender, and it's your job to figure out what it is and how to work with it and how you want to express it. I absolutely can understand using the queens as representing the feminine qualities within ourselves, the kings as representing the masculine qualities within ourselves. That stuff all makes a lot of sense to me. But I think the question is a lot bigger, and so it's really worthwhile to be able to experiment with that. Like I said, my go-to for a really long time was the cards have no gender. Just work with the energies of the kings as being, the queens are, I really hate the queens as being nurturing, caring, mothering types. I really, really hate that. There is no Queen of Wands that will ever be nurturing and caring and loving. That's a Queen of Cups quality. So I really hate using the queens as mothers. What I use is the chess pieces. The king is the king on the chessboard. The queen is the queen on the chessboard. The knights are the knights. The pages are the pawns. The king is, he's the highest rank. So he's the most important, but you castle him. you move him off into the corner, put the rook on one side of him, keep a row of pawns in front of him to protect him. He needs to be stable and protected, and he doesn't move. That fits the idea that the kings are the fixed element, fixed suit. The queens are in charge. They're everywhere on the board. They're up and down the rank, the file, the diagonal. They're all over. They can move as many squares as they want in a move. They're the ones that are taking care of everything and getting everything done, and that kind of fits the way that fits the women that I know as well. And so so that to me, in terms of, but then going on to the expression for a person, if they come up as a queen, they're really taking care of everything, getting everything done. They're in charge of everything and delegating and making sure that everybody's productive and busy. If they're coming up as a king, they need to be protected. They need to be set to the side. They're still in charge, but in a different way. And that's how I use the kings and queens in that sense. It has a lot less. It kind of fits my understanding of the way men and women work in terms of my personal experience of gender, but it is a lot less gendered in terms of general cultural standards, I guess. So I'll bring this to an end, but I did think that was important to kind of throw out there. Are there any other questions or comments, or anybody have anything else that they want to bring up?
I think along those lines, how often, well, I don't know, because those decks, like you said, that have the pages as princesses, do you find that useful to have kind of that immaturity between the genders and then the maturity between the genders, like as more of an
Yeah, I
evolved
do
state?
think it's useful. I've gotten so used to the particular types of decks that I use that I have ways of working with that tends to be useful as well. I mean, there are other ways that are also useful, but I think as you're getting used to a deck, I do think that being able to see that, like you said, that equality of a younger equality and then an older equality, I do think that that's really useful to keep in mind. One of the really important things to remember is that some of the very earliest tarot decks, there's the Visconti Sforza Tarot, and there's one at the Pierpont Morgan Library and one at the Carey Yale Library. And the one at the Carey Yale Library has 6 court cards for every suit, and it has a king and a queen, a male knight and a female knight, and a male page and a female page. And so even going back historically to the 15th century, we do see that gender equality between the court cards. And so, you know, it is sad that that got stripped away later on, and that originally that was there. And especially because female knights, I'm not aware of there very well could have been, and certainly, you know, historically we think of Joan of Arc. If you think of like a female knight, you think of somebody like that. But to keeping in mind that going back to the 15th century, we have that example. So yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
No, this is really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad to see everybody today.
Thanks as always, Joy. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks,
Jennifer.
Joy.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah. Nice to see you.